All right, order in the court. Order in the court. We shall now commence the trial of progression v. Status Quo 2013. Defendant, you have the floor. Thank you, Your Honor. Hello, fellow jury and your honorable judge. We are here today to discuss the question of whether or not Russia has improved throughout the years of 1852 to 1900. Although I believe that Russia improved, the plaintiff here is stating that Russia has definitely not improved. Okay, defendant, move on to your evidence. Let's start with Russia in 1852. My apologies, let's carry on. At this time, Alexander II's policy to free the serfs has had a detrimental effect on Russia's economic and social situations.
Objection. Your Honor, the defendant should not make any rash statements without showing evidence.
Defendant, proceed with your evidence. Of course. Ever since the mid-18th century, Russia has been slower economically. Russia had horrible communication system, railroad systems, a separated army, and the free serfs only made things worse. The coal and iron system was detrimental.
Objection. The defendant is failing to state the fact that the freed serfs increased the population and would inevitably increase the unemployment rate.
Will the defendant please respond to this statement? Of course. I agree that the unemployment went down, but when reviewing the statistics, this did not help the industry. I mean, they did not tolerate the fact that they needed to pay for their land. And with the horrible policy of the education system, the uneducated serfs had issues with this. Along that, the serfs were taken in the military at such a young age, meaning most of the employees were older men. Finally, the Crimean War left the weapon manufacturing business desolated, explaining the bad industry.
Objection. Your Honor, I would just like to say the defendant has failed to include the fact that Russia had suffered from the Russo-Turkish War in 1878. More than 10,000 soldiers died and several weapons were needed to fight this war. It's no wonder that the industry had suffered after this war. By 1900s, Russia still had to deal with the effects of the war, which is the same position that Russia had been in at the end of the Crimean War.
Very well. We will now hear the plaintiff's side.
Thank you, sir. Now the defendant here has brought good points. The industry and social situation were certainly horrible by 1852. This is absolutely no different from what Russia became by 1900s. By 1881, Alexander III decided to change the policy that the second had established. He reversed the policy on the freed serfs to change the social and economic situation in Europe, which in the end had no effect. The secret police were created to get rid of protesting and increased by the end of the 19th century. The defendant has focused on the economic and social relations, but has not included the problems Russia still had by 1900. The education system had still been horrible in Russia. Students were not allowed to form organizations, and the government faced problems with how much freedom to give the students on study.
Is this not the reason the Corps of Gendarme was created in 1826? With these provisions, some students such as Kwiatkowski joined Marxist circles and published Marxist articles such as Lviv, which was published at a university.
The representation of the nobles had also been an issue, creating friction between the government and the nobles. Finally, the serfs had created protests to attempt and reclaim land they believed was given to them by God.
That's enough. Now, does the defendant have any last remarks to what the plaintiff has said? Now, although the plaintiff has raised a few good points, there are several reasons to why Russia improved by the end of 1900. One point that the plaintiff could have raised was the possibility of a banking crisis in 1876. The crisis would have ruined Russia's economy and would prove that Russia only got worse, but it was avoided and it nearly healed. Nikolai Bunge and his company successfully avoided a banking crisis in 1876 and had recovered economically thanks to the selling of bonds. I would like to finish by summarizing what I have said. Although Russia suffered economically and socially from the freeing of the serfs and the slow industry system, Russia was able to recover thanks to Nikolai Bunge's banking system and the fact that Russia entered the Russo-Turkish War and won. Very well. Can the plaintiff offer his final remarks before the jury makes their decision?
Yes, Your Honor. Now the defendant has raised several points, but I can simply like to point out what the defendant has said. He has stated that after the Crimean War, Russia was left with terrible soil, industry, economy, and a bad reputation with the other major. Now, although he has stated that these things improved by 1900, this is not the case. With over 6 million square miles, several of the citizens would not at all have benefited from the simple banking crisis prevention or the selling of bonds. The scale is just too small for Russia to be called improved. That is all, Your Honor. I will leave the rest to the jury.
Well, I think we have heard enough from both sides. Now, we will let the jury reach a decision. Well, the jury has reached a decision, and the argument to whether or not Russia improved from 1852 to 1900 is in favor of the defendant. Okay, if you would all mind leaving the room, we will now make the decision official.